I meet a lot of people who think the Constitution is useless, while others wonder how people can get away with violating it. While these may appear to be opposing positions, I believe they stem from the same misconception, that the Constitution of the United States is some superhero that will come flying in to save the day. Rather, the Constitution is ink on parchment, a tool, nothing more. Like any other tool, the Constitution is absolutely useless unless it is picked up and wielded. And like any other tool, unless you learn how to use the Constitution, you're much more likely to crush your own thumb than those who are infringing on your rights. So let's take a look at the Constitution as a tool. Next on the Constitution Study.
Lovely neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution, teach our action generation to be free. You may wonder, why bother reading and studying the Constitution if it's useless, or if it's some magic thing that can't be violated? We need to understand the Constitution, and I'll give you some examples why as we go through this episode. Now, I hope you'll check out more at the website constitutionstudy.com. You can find the article that goes with this episode and the links that I use to prove my point. We'll talk more about that at the end of the episode, but for now, let's take a look at the Constitution and how we can use it. We need to start at the beginning. What is the Constitution? Yes, it's ink on parchment, words on paper. If that's all it is, then why do so many people revere it? In the Supreme Court case Marbury versus Madison, we find, certainly all those who have framed written constitutions contemplate them as forming the fundamental and paramount law of the nation. So if the Constitution is the fundamental and paramount law of the United States, why is it violated so often? Because the Constitution is just laws, which Webster's 1828 dictionary defines as a rule, particularly an established or permanent rule prescribed by the supreme power of a state to its subjects for regulating their action, particularly their social actions. The Constitution is not some magical incantation or a spell that forces all who hear it to comply. Like any other law, it's powerless without law enforcement, which Webster's 1828 dictionary defines as that which gives energy or effect, sanction. The penalties of law are enforcements. In other words, the Constitution, like any other law, is merely a tool, a means of articulating the rules. It's their enforcement that gives laws powers. The Marbury Court stated that the Constitution forms a fundamental and paramount law of a nation, or as Article 6, Clause 2 states, the supreme law of the land. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. However, all this vaunted talk of supreme, fundamental, and paramount laws mean absolutely nothing unless and until they are enforced. Most people I talk to about the Constitution see it as something someone else should be using to protect their rights. I agree. People like politicians, judges, and attorneys should be using the Constitution, should be enforcing the rules of the Constitution. Today, however, they show little interest in fulfilling the oath they took to support it. Now, part of the reason I believe is the fact that most politicians and all judges and attorneys learn their craft in law schools. Sadly, it appears that these supposed schools of law completely ignore the supreme law of the land. For more than 5 years, I've asked every judge, attorney, or anyone who attended law school a simple question. Did they study the actual Constitution in law school, or did they study constitutional law? In those 5 years, I've had exactly one person say he studied the Constitution in law school. Constitutional law, quote unquote, is not law because it did not go through the lawmaking process. Rather, it's the opinions of judges passed down and manipulated over generations of attorneys in order to arrive at the outcome they sought. Many of the law school graduates I have met stated how they studied the Constitution in other ways, but the schools dedicated to teaching the law have failed to teach the students the supreme law of the land. To understand why this is so important, let's take a look at how the Constitution functions. What prevents Congress from making laws that control a person's speech or what they can publish? Most people would say the First Amendment. The First Amendment may prohibit such actions, but can do nothing to prevent it. Only the enforcement of the First Amendment would render such a law null and void, and only the political backlash from such unconstitutional actions would prevent members of Congress from voting for such a law in the first place. It's the same way a hammer cannot drive a nail until it's picked up and swung properly. Yet in the United States today, Congress passes hundreds of unconstitutional laws, and the executive agencies promulgate thousands of unconstitutional rules and regulations every year. Yet no one seems concerned about it. Why? Well, first, I believe that most politicians and bureaucrats have no clue what the Constitution actually says. I guess in their case, ignorance is bliss. Second, we the people rarely, if ever, actually provide the political backlash to dissuade government actors from their unconstitutional acts. Why do the American people do nothing when the supreme law of the land is violated? Again, I think there are two reasons. First, we the people know even less about the Constitution than those who went to law school. In this case, ignorance is not bliss, but misery. Second, because we keep sitting around for Captain Constitution to fly in and save the day. Is this how the Constitution was meant to be wielded? When I was in high school, I was taught that the Constitution was only for politicians, judges, and lawyers, and that it was too complicated for average people to understand it. It wasn't until decades after that I learned the truth about who the Constitution was written for. The first clue to who the Constitution was written for comes from its own preamble. We, the people of the United States, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. If we, the people, are the ones who ordained and established the Constitution for the United States, shouldn't we not only know what it says, but be well educated on the subject? This is certainly what John Jay, our first Chief Justice of the United States, thought about it. Every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. Mr. Jay thought that everyone should not only read and study the Constitution, but to teach it to the rising generations. In the opinion of the very first Chief Justice, it was not the responsibility of government to teach our children to be free. It's each and every one of ours. And look at what we get for diligently reading and studying the Constitution. Tools. Reading and studying the Constitution gives us the tools to recognize when our rights are being violated, and the tools to defend and assert them. However, just like the first toolkit many of us got when we were young, these tools won't do us any good if we keep them locked up and refuse to use them. Now we know where to get the tools we need. We should start figuring out how to put them to good use. There's an old saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It expresses the idea of tunnel vision. If all you have is a hammer, the only thing you can do is drive things with it as if they were nails. Thankfully, the Constitution is not a single tool, but a tool kit. And like any toolkit, there are some tools we use more often than others. That's not to say the other tools are less valuable, but I found a couple of tools that are almost universal in their ability to help the other tools work. Which brings us back to the Supremacy Clause. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. I know we've already mentioned the Supremacy Clause, but there are a few things about this tool that may not be obvious at first. The Supremacy Clause clearly lists three things as the supreme law of the land. First, the Constitution. That seems pretty obvious. Second, the laws of the United States, but only those laws made pursuant to the Constitution or following the Constitution. Lastly, treaties. Again, only those treaties made under the authority of the United States. And where does the United States get its authority? Why, from the Constitution, of course. This means that just because Congress passes a law or the President signs a treaty with the advice and consent of the Senate, it does not make it the supreme law of the land. In fact, as Alexander Hamilton put it in Federalist 78, There is no position which depends on clear principles that every act of a delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised, is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than his principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men, acting by virtue of powers, may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid. Now, let's look at what is not included as the supreme law of the land. Executive orders are not the supreme law of the land. Neither are rules and regulations made by the executive branch. Even the decisions of courts are not the supreme law of the land. In fact, the rest of the Supremacy Clause states, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. In other words, the judges are bound to the Constitution, not the other way around. That sounds like a pretty beefy tool to me. The next tool we need to have in our pocket is the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Simply put, if the Constitution doesn't delegate a power to the United States, then it belongs to someone else. Though some people like to state that the Constitution implies powers it doesn't specifically enumerate, that doesn't match with what the 10th Amendment says. Another important point. Powers are delegated to the United States. What does it mean to delegate? Again, Webster's 1828 dictionary defines delegate as to entrust, to commit, to deliver to another's care and exercise, as to delegate authority or power to an envoy, representative, or judge. That means the powers not only had to exist before they were delegated to the United States, but they needed to be possessed by another entity. In this case, as the 10th Amendment points out, the powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states or the people. Reserved is defined as kept for another or future use, retained. That means that any power the Constitution does not delegate to the United States is yours, either directly or through your state. These two clauses provide so much power to the other tools in the Constitution. It's like going from a simple screwdriver to a power screwdriver. Sure, you have a right to not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, according to Amendments 5 and 14. But the Supremacy Clause means no entity can legally place an exception to that law. It also means that when the federal government comes in to regulate something they have not been delegated the power to regulate, the 10th Amendment is your legal authority to say no. Hopefully now you have a better idea of the tools you have available and are feeling encouraged to learn how to use them. I'm reasonably sure you feel like you're standing there with your bag of tools, staring at a decrepit old apartment building and wondering what difference you can make. After all, the place is huge, it's a mess, and the vast majority of the tenants either won't do a thing or are actively trying to destroy the place. What can one person do in the face of such opposition? Don't miss the forest for the trees. Yes, the United States is a gigantic mess with hundreds of millions of people and 50 different states, all with their own agendas. You don't have to fix the United States, though. All you have to do is make your neighborhood better. That decrepit and messed up apartment building is made up of apartments, just as the United States is made up of individual states. Each of those apartments is made up of different rooms, just as the states are made up of counties, cities, and towns. So before you go trying to fix the United States, even before you try to fix your own state, clean up your county, city, or town. Start by voting for representatives who understand the oath they will take to support the Constitution of your state and of the United States. Many of them will not have studied these constitutions, so help them. Point out their oaths, what the Constitution actually says, and your expectation that they fulfill their oath. If they don't, make sure the political backlash is both constitutionally sound and very, very public. To do that, you'll also need to help your neighbors understand the Constitution and the consequences of ignoring it. That way, when your elected representatives screw up, and they will, it's not just you pushing back, but hopefully a growing number of your neighbors. As those elected officials start looking at statewide offices, make sure they know you will hold them to their oaths just as firmly at the state level as you did at the local level. As more and more people across your state see the benefit of using the tools we have to keep our governments in check, they'll start learning to use these tools as well. And your state will not only be more constitutional, but freer. As this message spreads across the states, they will become more constitutionally sound as well. And Washington, D.C. will become less important. After all, according to the supreme law of the land, there's actually very little the federal government can legally do. With all the crazy going around, I thought we could all use a good news story. With all the fear, the desperation, the belief that there's nothing we can do, I thought a little encouragement would be a nice shot in the arm. To recognize you don't have to fix the United States. You don't have to fix your state. Really, all you have to do is fix your town, your county, even your neighborhood. You make yours a little better, others make theirs a little better, and pretty soon your sound is better. You get enough towns involved and suddenly your county is constitutional. Make sure maybe you hire a constitutional sheriff or county mayor. Of course, the counties start getting more constitutional and people start learning the importance of actually using the Constitution to keep our elected employees in check. Suddenly the state starts becoming more constitutional as well. I'm not saying there won't be arguments. I'm not saying there won't be disagreements. But I'm saying we will be moving down a path that still requires we follow the rule of law. And once the states figure out that they created the federal government, not the other way around, that the states established the rules for the federal government, not the other way around, D.C. becomes irrelevant. Because the states can simply say, no. Make your unconstitutional laws. No. Create your unconstitutional edicts. No. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. It probably won't even happen in our lifetimes. We've spent over 150 years turning the United States from a constitutional republic of republics into a tyrannical democracy of a unified monstrosity. Take time to fix. But even if we don't fix this right away, even if we don't fix it in our lifetimes, we get to live in towns and counties and cities where our rights are protected. We even get the chance to have our children raised and become adults, being free, having been taught to be free. Isn't that worth it? I think so. That's why I do what I do here at the Constitution Study. It's why I wrote my book, The Constitution Study. It's why I've written the other books I've written. It's why I set the Patriots program. It's why I spend all of this time writing articles, doing videos, doing audio podcasts, doing my radio program, doing interviews, doing classes, doing everything I can to help people realize the tools for our liberty are at our feet if we would just pick them up and learn how to use them. Now, again, I hope you join us at the Patriots program. That's kind of like the advanced school, the people that really want to get involved, that want to learn about these tools, that want to communicate with others that are trying to use these tools and are willing to stand up and actually wield the tools to protect not only their freedom, but those of their friends and neighbors. Find out more at constitutionstudy.com/patriots. You can also check out the radio program at americaoutloud.news. Just look for the Constitution Study and, well, my ugly mug. All these tools are available to you, and they take a lot of time and effort and, yes, money. So if you can help either by buying something at the store or donating to the cause or just sharing this information so that others see it as well, I would greatly appreciate it. Regardless, I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this a little ray of sunshine in a dark and gloomy world. I hope you come back and join us next time for the Constitution Study.